harms both individual happiness and productivity, and secondly, why this whole society as a whole back from advancing towards more equal futures. First of all, there are a few things I want to talk about. What is laziness look like? Do you think laziness typically manifests as an assignment of blame or a prediction that something bad is going to happen to someone? So i.e., something bad happens to you because you were lazy, or something bad will happen to you if you are lazy, because often to teach that from parents to children and teachers to children, and also, for example, within the workplace, used as a shaming mechanism. I think the main problem with laziness and how it exists in the status quo is that it's often wielded as an intrinsic moral harm. So you say they are lazy, and the implication they are bad, there's something wrong with them, regardless of what the consequences are. We think it often means this person is greedy, that they're a moral failure, and clearly assign correct accusations of laziness to people. Obviously, that there are huge stigmas that mean people hide serious problems in your life. For example, if you're grieving the death of a loved one, if you're experiencing serious mental health issues, there are obviously huge societal stigmas that prevent you from sharing that, which again often means that laziness is poorly assigned as a poor they are actually being lazy in that situation. The last thing that I want to talk about is why do we think people have intrinsic motivation to work hard on both sides of the house? The first thing I want to note is that people have intrinsic motivation because they care about the people around them. So, for example, people often vent when they go into careers in academia where they make far less money because they want to improve society for better. And to do things because they'll make a better future for their children, we don't think this goes away on either side. Secondly, people obviously have capitalism incentives on either side. So you have to do a good job at work because you don't want to get fired, and there still is an element of competition in the fact that you have to do things like pay for housing, pay for food, that exists on both sides. The last thing that I want to say is that we think laziness is actually probably a pretty powerful motivation in a lot of cases. If you're doing a rote task and you're like, I hate this, I don't like doing this, I don't like how much time I spend on it, that's probably a pretty powerful motivator for you to make that task simpler, to make that task more efficient. We don't think being lazy necessarily means that you are doing a bad job and that you're not making it easier for yourself to be lazy. Before I go to my argument, I'll take a look.
Yeah, so this debate is not exclusively about productivity. So are we happy to, for instance, help people to go get a hobby or go outside and touch grass once in a while?
So I think that we don't want to stigmatize people for the things that they want to do in their free time. Our stance is that people can best allocate for themselves what is the most fulfilling use of their free time. We don't think we should stigmatize people for what they choose to spend time. There's an individual health and happiness. But laziness is stigmatized. You're constantly trying to fight that stigma. You want to do everything in your power to not be perceived that way because it means you're less likely to be promoted. You're less likely to be treated well. You're less likely to be treated favorably by your peers. A few instances. One, I think what that means is that it's often internalization for your employer. If you do not work all the hours, you're often going to be labeled as, for example, laziness. The other problem with this is that most people cannot actually work for 8 hours straight. Like when they force themselves to do that, we create busy work. So we want to create the illusion of busyness, and pretending to look busy in order to ward off the idea that there is stigma on the side of the house. Lastly, we think that people are just pressured into doing things like taking up extra hobbies and side hustles. There's extremely strong narrative in social media that outside of your 9 to 5, if you aren't doing something extra to get ahead in this life, if you aren't taking up that hobby, if you aren't becoming an expert in Russian literature, then you're doing something bad with your free time. And this probably means that people are pressured into doing things where they're worthwhile or not. The last thing is that people don't just don't want to ask for accommodations. The idea of laziness is that if you aren't working hard and you aren't, being productive and you aren't being morally good. So when you have to ask, for example, like I cannot work these hours of work, I need to go on maternity leave, I need, for example, accommodations for my exams, there's often a huge stigma where you feel like you're asking because you cannot study hard enough, you can't work hard enough to reach that bar. I think that is a huge disadvantage for people who are already going through struggles in their side of the house. What is the end point of all this? One, I think people are less happy. I think the average person probably just wants to spend time with their friends and family. They want to relax. They don't need to have these huge ambitions. They just want to do things that make them happy, and they are very good at prioritizing what makes them happy. I think they just elude their incentives in their side house. The other thing is that you should also believe that this probably makes people less efficient overall because they spend all that time doing busy work. They spend all that time stressing themselves out and resting, so when they're actually working, they're not as productive as they otherwise would be. Second argument then on why we think this has significant impacts in terms of bringing about quality for others. First thing, I want to talk about work advocacy. Because I think that many of those problems within, for example, asking within a workplace for better demands, asking, for example, for a 4-hour work week, asking for more efficient tools, is that you need worker solidarity. So you need people, amongst others, you need to go to your boss, for example, and say that we demand better working conditions. When there's a stigma that you will be perceived as lazy, not only by your boss, but also by your peers, I think it makes it significantly more difficult for people to cooperate together on social causes and work causes that are positive for everyone due to the fact that they're scared of being perceived as lazy if they ask for things that are better. So that's the problem they have to deal with, is that the status quo is not always the best. You want to ask for better things, sometimes you have to say, I am struggling, I am finding this hard, this is not making me want to work, and that is something that we want to make easier on our side. But secondly, is that we think people are often just assigned blame for being lazy as a moral failure in and of itself to hide structural reasons. So for example, if certain groups do economically much worse than others, a common stereotype in the science themselves that they're lazy. They just don't work hard enough, and they're not motivated enough. Even though there are a variety of other reasons that can be excused and used to dismiss their causes, it is true when we don't assign laziness as a pure world cause, when we're obligated to find out what the actual problems are in things. For these reasons, I'm very glad to close.
When you're a child and your parents tell you to stop watching the same episode of SpongeBob you know you've seen 10 times before and go outside and get out into the sun, they're not stigmatizing laziness because you're failing to act as an economically productive unit under the capitalist mode of production. They're doing it because they love you and they understand that you're not always the best judge of the things that will make you happy, and you genuinely will be more happy if you put your laziness aside and go and have some fun in the sun, right? The basic point here is that this stigma, just like every other norm and every other accepted standard of behavior, interacts with all the other ways we go in behavior. As a result of this, because we genuinely do care for one another, we are tending to use the stigma in a way that forces us into better engaging with the ways in which we can improve our lives. What am I going to do in this speech? First of all, a little bit more context on how this stigma works and how it manifests in the majority of cases. I will then talk about why, in general, laziness is bad and robs us of the ability to unlock our own self-interest, and then just the solution, how stigma helps with that. Okay, context here. There's two important contexts on how the stigma against laziness manifests. The first thing I want to say is that, like most other norms of behavior, it can often and is most effective when it is just self-reinforcing. It doesn't depend on the ways in which other people are actively going to use the stigma against you. It is simply an internal thumb on the scale when we decide whether to do something that we should prioritize the less lazy option if it is open to you. Crucially, that laziness, as my intro flags thematically, we'll talk about systemically, isn't just linked to economic productivity. It literally means taking a gamble, doing something new, expending energy on something you would otherwise not do. The second more important context, also I have linked, stigma interacts with all the other ways in which we choose to regulate behavior socially and the ways in which we stigmatize behavior. So I'll start with a really basic and just broad example. This morning, when I see a debater sleeping on the bus at FPT University, I don't go, stigma, shake them away and say, why aren't you writing the last applications? The deadline is in 2 weeks. Stigma against laziness interacts with other things, like it is stigmatized to be really mean to people, to be really weird to other human beings, to treat people in a way that minimizes their own agency. We think all of those norms that OG also stands for do interact with the stigma against laziness, and it does this in 2 ways. It means you won't have the stigma actually weaponized against you where people are capable of realizing that doing so would act in a way that undermines your agency and undermines those norms. But secondly, it also just colors the contours of what laziness looks like, because we also, irrespective of the stigma against laziness, have norms like you should balance work and life, like you should also perceive things that work for you, that human dignity exists as a universal right. That colors the way in which laziness is perceived. We think laziness, therefore, is less likely to be you left work or 10 p.m. how dare you, and more like it's awful that we haven't gone to the family dinner because you thought a 10-minute bus ride was too long. Sorry, things going on in the family life sometimes. That's the main context. Okay, with that in mind, why is laziness uniquely bad? This directly responds to the characterization that all of OG's case so far rests on, that irrespective and if this norm doesn't exist, people are automatically going to be good at judging the ways in which they can enjoy their lives. This is not true for a couple of reasons. First of all, just on an intuitive level, you have probably encountered people who are doing things that they probably actively know are not making them happy, but they still do it anyway because they're stuck in a certain level of drugs. For example, it is very, very easy if you have a gambling addiction to continue gambling rather than taking the more difficult steps of moving past the direct engagement with yourself. And that is at a high level of laziness. But it also just exists on a more basic level. People get stuff in once because they find it on a very initial analysis easier to do the very basic, low accessibility, but also just low enjoyment thing because they don't have any countervailing incentive in the absence of the stigma to push past that and do something that is going to be better. Laziness fundamentally reinforces all the biases that exist to lock people out of enjoying their life beneficially. It locks them towards biases, towards inertia, towards the status quo. It also is like loss aversion biases, right? if you think that maybe taking up a new hobby would improve your life, or on an economic level, putting in more job applications would improve your life, when you have a bias towards loss aversion, you're never going to want to risk the additional energy to do that, even though on an objective analysis, it probably is worth that cost benefit. So the stigma against laziness in that context is a very important tipping point that gets you over that bias and gets you into making decisions that actually are in your self-interest. We think that this way, you're able to fundamentally unlock a lot more enjoyment in your life, both on an economic and non-economic metric, in a way that we don't think exists in the OG world. I'll go on to how the stigma then helps in a couple of ways, but before I do that, I'll close this in.
The use case for the stigma isn't a salary man working a well-paid but unfulfilling job, very simply because that person is working and you don't think how lazy of him to not change his life.
Right, so we think the analysis that we give you is probably generalizable to either of these cases. We think, again, just the analysis that I've already given you on norm contraction proves two things. First of all, it proves that the norm is likely going to be used in uniquely beneficial ways, where irrespective of whether you like laziness analysis applies to economic and non-economic life improvements, there are still people around you who care about you, who are incentivized to use it in a way. And also, this is again the self-reinforcement material. You as an individual can probably just push back against falling into a rut in either sense. So we think that this analysis was broadly generalizing. Okay. With that in mind, why is this fundamentally unique? I've already given you some analysis on ways in which you're able to push back against biases towards inertia. But also, crucially, that just tells you about why people fundamentally aren't able to prove what's best for them. On a broad level as well, and this is a generalizing point, we don't think anyone is able to prove that the good life is objectively ascertainable. What this means is two things. First of all, there isn't an objective good life, and even your subjective self-perception of what is good probably changes over time and changes in a number of ways throughout the course of your life. With that in mind, we think it's really important that people have an ongoing and continuous incentive to expend energy on pursuing different ways in which their life could be increased, and their quality of life could be better. We think that the stigmatization against laziness is particularly effective in this context, but there's a continual lifelong incentive to spend what additional energy you may have on ways in which your life can be improved. This applies primarily to the non-economic analysis and also in case of the POI method, in that you have a particular buffer against falling damages for repeated standards of identical conduct with diminishing returns on the way which they enjoy life. It's a continual advantage towards movement, it's a continual advantage towards self-betterment, and it's a continued incentive towards the improvements that unlock the value. At this point in the speech, what I want you to remember as you go down to the following speech today and come into your deliberations is that we gave you the earliest possible opportunity with this generalizable analysis about the ways in which people are unable to unlock structurally in the status quo, the ways in which their lives can be improved, and we give you a continued and ongoing incentive towards that improvement to unlock the benefits that accrue there for those reasons. However.
Now, I'm going to follow the next speaker.
Our perception of what laziness is relational. It may be true that on an objective level, someone working hard at an extremely competitive corporate job who works less hard than the other people who stay at the office is not objectively by any reasonable person's metric lazy. But in terms of how that narrative is reinforced by their coworkers, by how they see other people doing things around them, it genuinely does feel lazy to them. This narrative interacts with them too. How does this narrative manifest? Opposition suggests it can help people to unlock things that are good for them, to introspect and think about which hobbies are best for them that they wouldn't otherwise do when they might spend time watching TV on the couch excessively. I have a number of responses. First, as I pointed out relationally, in a lot of cases, hobbies are seen as comparatively lazy versus doing the moralized competitive work that people want. Second, where there is a trade-off in terms of hobbies that are seen as productive, like learning a language or going to the gym or whatever, my proposal from opening government is that sometimes, this is just excessive, we moralize people's conduct in terms of what they enjoy. People enjoy gaming, they enjoy watching TV. Yes, people know these things excessively are bad for them. But of course, in a world we don't lazily use a laziness narrative to say, this is bad because it is lazy, and we instead give people reasons, like positively, going to the gym will make you feel better, as opposed to saying, in the absence of doing this, you will be lazy. We can still provide a lot of reasons for self-improvement. Similarly, learn a new language because it's useful to you. We don't always need the converse. A weaker version of the narrative still functions in a lot of cases to make people do stuff that's good for them. But second of all, if you don't think, and people tell you, like, get your mind off of it, go to the gym, learn a new language, whatever, and don't actually introspect about what you want and actually take time to relax, that too is bad for your ability to find yourself and what you want. There is no response to an extremely important argument on this arena, that the fact that we cannot enjoy rest and is seen as guilty, as moralistic, means that that rest is not actually effective in recharging us and allowing us to be economically productive, allowing us to learn that language. Which means in a lot of cases, people do not actually decrease in their role the amount of time they spend doing the bad stuff, because their social and emotional battery is not yet recharged by the rest that they take. The implications of this are twofold. Number one, there's an extremely high burden on any lot team on the ground to show us that being motivating people with the idea that they're lazy improves the economy or improves society. A, for the reason that Rena pointed out, there are a number of intrinsic reasons, and I'll repeat them in a moment, why people still work hard. And second, if you plot a graph of countries by wealth and plot a graph of countries by happiness, you will find that correlations between wealth and happiness are shockingly low. The happiest country in the world is Bhutan. Many Western countries are extremely unhappy. This is because, despite our economic development, we are not able to bring ourselves to a point where we are happy and satisfied because it's never enough. In their world, they actually have to prove that instrumentally, all these innovations and benefits that trickle down actually make utility points and happiness that at the end of the day drive people to wake up and smile. Our side issues far more of that. But second, I agree that in a lot of cases, people are abjectly unreasonable in the way that they characterize others as lazy. However, there are a variety of ways in which this is likely to be false, because we don't have a window into everyone's lives. We don't know how much time they spend at home. We have no window into their private lives in a lot of cases. No, we don't go harass people on the bus. No, we are not abjectly evil, immoral people. But on the margin that this debate operates on, we see someone slacking off at work on their phone. We use laziness, even if that tracks onto the fact that we already had inklings that we didn't like them, to further push down on that person and to further intuit that their laziness means that they're a moral failure. And I think that when it comes to laziness, there's a particular way in which it's pernicious, because it says you have potential. It says that you will be good absent your moral failing, absent your lack of perseverance, absent things that you can't control. First of all, I question whether or not this is always within people's control. Some people probably just have, intuitively, they are born with less capacity to work really, really hard and motivate themselves. Some people need more rest, they need more sleep. I suggest that laziness just hurts and harms those people, because it suggests that everyone has an intrinsic ability to work to some imaginary level, and if you're not there, then you're not happy. Now, how does this get weaponized politically? In our world. Now, we agree, there are lots of other ways to weaponize all kinds of other areas politically, and I know what I'm going to say. I think that there are a variety of ways why laziness tracks onto this in far worse ways. Number one, because it posits a simple explanation for group differences and social differences, which is related to internal moral failure as opposed to structural or social outcomes. As opposed to us thinking about what has caused that condition that has led to an inequality that shouldn't exist, by race or by gender or whatever it is, even if it just means competitiveness in the job market or university prestige or whatever else you want to call it. Laziness will always be the easiest explanation that will prevent us from finding those other things. Number one, this is bad on a social and economic level. If it is true that a narrative of laziness can be weaponized politically against groups who are disenfranchised, we do not access their potential, we do not access their ability to improve the world. But second of all, I'd suggest that the reason why people do work in our side is that hobbies are fun. They provide easy ways to adjudicate whether or not you're enjoying something. Like, I can intuitively just get better at rock climbing if I do it more. I can get better at playing an instrument. It is different from my progression in debating, in university, or whatever. Therefore, I have a lot of reasons why I want to do stuff anyway. But when it comes to the hard stuff, like employment, I don't think it's sufficient just to say, of course, that capitalism will always remain the same across all the debate, but I do think it is relatively true that across all society, capitalist, communist, whatever, you need to do hard things that you don't like, and on no one that says you are lazy for not doing those things, it is not clear that that actually motivates you. It makes you feel upset, it puts you down, and maybe you identify as lazy. Maybe you think, I can't solve this, I'm just a lazy person, and you give up in a lot of cases and prevent yourself from taking the steps of improvement that their side would otherwise make. Now, opposition's best case in this argument is what I'll get to now, but before that, I will take the POI from closing.
Rich people will be glamorized anyway, but at least now we know roast Kim Kardashian for being entitled trash that doesn't do shit.
Yeah, I think, yes, there are potentially a very marginal extension there on the idea that some of the most powerful people can be put down as lazy. I don't think she cares that because she's lazy and she's really powerful. So I think that the harsh burden on their side of the house is to prove that the way we can apply this narrative to the powerful is stronger than the way it gets applied to the powerless, when every other narrative that interacts with this narrative is already going to be skewed to the most powerful as opposed to the most powerless. Massive burdens that improve that extension, but I'd love for them to try. What impact should take place with us at the end of the day? First of all, we have proven a variety of reasons why people inaccurately identify when others are lazy, and inaccurately identify whether they are lazy. Second, we have proven that even if this is done accurately, then a large amount of cases will make people who are doing productive things feel worse, It will make them not recharge and not be able to be economically productive actors that can make the number go higher. And similarly, it will actually not succeed at making people who are genuinely lazy, intrinsically lazy, whatever you want to call it, or just have those inklings that they won't work hard, actually do those things because they don't like being called this, because they often dismiss it or segment it or make it a secondary part of their identity. The endpoint in our case is very simple. It is the happiness utility points. We propose that there will not be a large change in economic development or innovation. Maybe there is, and that's fine. I would much rather be happier than be stuck on the hedonic treadmill on their side. And I think that the way that laziness manifests, compared to any other narrative, even generic productivity culture narratives, is particularly pernicious, moralizing, and disgusting. Kind of cool.
I also want non-verbal KYs just because the chair sounds weird. The framing in our case is very simple, which is that independent of whether or not we have this stigma, human experience is complex and difficult to negotiate. It is non-reconcilable with a state of inertia, which most people find comfortable. It is comforting for individuals to say that they are resting, to do nothing, because the more you rest, the more you're likely to be happy with that period of rest. It is that kind of inertia that forces individuals to not have any incentive whatsoever to break out of the comfort zone and to pursue things. It is inherently convenient, uncertain, and painful to try new things. You need the stigma to give you that incentive to get out there and do things and maximize utility as a whole. I want to talk about 3 things in this speech. Firstly, what stigma is and what laziness is. Secondly, what this economic angle coming out of OG is. And then finally, talking about hobbies and maximization of utility in general. Firstly, what is this stigma? The first thing to say is that stigma, as Karen explains to you, interacts with a lot of other laws so as to counteract the worst possible excesses of stigma. So the vast majority of PM's case falls flat at the point at which all those like utilizations of stigma are just unlikely to manifest because people are just unlikely to be that reasonable. The burden of government, given this, is to show why all of these laws, without the presence of this specific stigma, would maximize utility and happiness. So what we prove at OO conclusively is 3 things that are unique about this stigma that helps to counteract the worst excesses of other forms of laws. The first thing to say here is that the stigma against laziness is focused on effort, not result. This is important because laziness is all about you getting out there and doing something. It is not telling you that you need to get out there and get an A. So for instance, this also allows for moderation of expectations because parents now can tell their children, please do some work rather than please go out there and get a 97. This counters the worst excesses of hyper-parenting, for instance. Secondly, it's focused on maximizing an individual's potential. So it's tailored to the individual rather than a societal standard of what is correct or what is best. So if that complaint is about individuals staying at work and maximizing the amount of time that they're spending at work just to look busy, this is in fact worse for them or with all kinds of other norms such as the norms that for instance you give your work 110%. Thirdly, the stigma against laziness is non-prescriptive. It doesn't have a finite endpoint, it just tells you that there's a range of behaviors and a range of things that you can do with the time and effort. Please go out there and pursue one. The reason why this is important is because if one finds the frame coming out from PM that this is exclusively about economically productive behaviors, it is not. It's about telling individuals that they can pursue hobbies, that if they genuinely find work draining, they can get out there and find a new form of work, that if they don't like their current friendship group, they can just go out there and pursue a new hobby and find a new set of friends. It is that countering of inertia that is inherently non-prescriptive and far better than in the absence of this stigma where you only have to set a norm that are sometimes prescriptive, like focus on result and not focus on maximizing potential. Secondly, they claim that enforcement of these norms is always going to be problematic because people are very few insight into each other's lives. Presumably, this argument coming out from PM leads to the end point that people would like enforce this stigma poorly. 3 responses. Firstly, this stigma is not dependent on external reinforcement. It's dependent on you yourself also realizing at some point that the state of laziness that you're in is one that's unproductive and unpleasant for you, right? I'm sure we've all had like those lazy holidays where you just sit there and dig around in front of the TV for like 4 hours. It's really not fun. Digging around is only fun when you actually make the choice to do it because you think there's going to be utility there. Secondly, the same is true of literally any other norm and status quo. All norms require individuals, require enforced by individuals who are never have a complete and full insight into your life. So norms like being kind, but neglect the fact that you're also going through a difficult time. Don't swear is probably also neglecting the fact that like you probably were just raised in an environment where swearing is predominant and common. So this enforcement mechanism is just very strange coming out in their work. Thirdly, even in the worst case scenario where we accept that there are some instances in which the stigma is going to be poorly utilized later, I think what we prove in our work is that in every single instance, even in the worst possible instances of stigma, you're likely to go out there and find your own personal metric, find something that is useful and interesting to you. So even if you are, for instance, forced out of a state of rest and you might have found comforting, you're at the very least still likely to find some utility in whatever choice you choose to pursue independently. The reason why this framing is important is because the counterfactual is literally a world in which it's literally a world in which, like on their end, there are likely that individuals just rest. They're never going to know what is interesting to them. They're never going to have incentives to step out of their comfort zone. So that's the counterfactual that God bench needs to defend. Thirdly, the counterfactual that they try to assert in DPM is that you can just give individuals reasons rather than imposing moral blame upon things. So by telling individuals that going to the gym is good for your health, that presumably allows individuals to also maximize self-interest. Three responses again. Firstly, they don't even recognize the reasons as to why this is going to be the likely counterfactual. But secondly, if it is true in level that individuals don't know your lived experiences and consequently can never evaluate the state of your life, it's highly unlikely that they're going to give you nuanced and good reasons as to why you ought to do this. So they don't necessarily need to accept that either you choose not to do anything at all, or B, how will you're incentivized to go out there and find something and do that thing. Thirdly, I think giving reasons is in and of itself bad because that's prescriptive behavior. The difference here is that stigma against laziness forces you to confront and choose what you personally think might be most brutal to you at that point in time. That element of non-prescriptiveness is unique to this law and most important. Thirdly, on this element of like economics, they think that now like individuals can't rest and that's bad. People still saying it's just like because it's not going to be unreasonably used, because it's going to be counteracted by other laws, it's just highly unlikely to be a case where you genuinely are shitting on people for resting after a period of working or doing things or pursuing hobbies. But secondly, even if it is true that individuals are deprived of rest, the counterfactual is that oftentimes individuals rest too much because the period of rest creates a sense of inertia. It forces you to be comfortable with not doing anything. And it's that element of inertia that makes it inherently difficult for you to confront things later on when you inevitably find certain life experiences interesting and worth pursuing. Then they claim, now you lose out on worker solidarity because now nobody would like want to break the collective action problem to come out and ask for better working hours. The first thing to say here is that societal upliftment is more consistent with the stigma against laziness, because the stigma against laziness is inherently one that is discontentment with status quo. It is one that forces individuals to recognize that status quo as they are living in it is inadequate. It counteracts inertia and forces you to go out there and find a better alternative. The reason why this is important is because it flips that to outside but for that okay opening.
So when you just sit on the couch for 10 hours, you feel intrinsically bad because you are not educated, you are not hydrating your body, you're not nourishing your body, you're not taking time for your body. There are so many reasons not to do the worst version of things. Why should people have to feel inadequate and always pursue something better?
Okay, the first thing to say here is I don't think it's about feeling inadequate because as I explained to you, the stigma is not prescriptive and the stigma is focused on effort rather than result. But secondly, even if individuals innately and do have some incentive to feel bad when they are resting for an overly long period of time, the difference in that work is you never have any incentive to counteract the feeling bad. Because in your mind, it's always going to be either I sit here and I get no utility out of doing nothing, or I have to go out there, face new people, pursue new opportunities, put myself out there and step out of my comfort zone. If both are equally as undesirable, what changes in our is that the stigma uniformly gives individuals an incentive to get out there and see the world as is. Finally, they claim people will just give up and that's bad for some weird reason. The first thing to say here is just that I don't think it's likely that people are going to entirely give up just because of this stigma against laziness, because again, this is focused on individuals getting set rather than dependent on outcome. But secondly, the main is very simple. The mechanization of solving structural barriers is one in which you are discontent with status quo and you are incentivized to go out there. But on a day-to-day basis, because no one ever actually knows what makes you happy, what you need as an incentive to push you out there and try to find those reasons. I'm incredibly proud to oppose.
where this round is actually important is not about someone getting off the couch and going to the gym. It's about the way the societal narrative has been leveraged against vulnerable groups to make them seem bad, to make them feel bad, and to depress them so that they cannot get access to sufficient resources, so they cannot be provided for them. The extension from imposing government is going to be quite simple. We're going to talk about the way that this has been politically leveraged against the poor to diminish access to things like welfare services that are incredibly important and isn't touching opening governments. So the first thing that I want to talk about, or I'm even just going to get right into the extension and explain why it's the case that this reduces welfare for people in need. I want to start off by noting that opening opposition at the end of our case does have some claim that says that this causes people to identify the status quo, and so they work hard to change societal structures. This is all assertion. There's no reason why this is true. We'll give you overwhelming reasons why it's the case that this isn't true. So to start then, I want to talk about why it's the case that this is often targeted at poor people who are deeply in need. Politicians dehumanize those that receive welfare by portraying them as often A, leeching off of the state, that the notion of a welfare queen, for example, someone who has multiple children who's just trying to leech off the state and provide for their family just by virtue of the tax dollars of others. But second, as making the active decision not to contribute to society, so that they are a person that is undeserving of support, that they have decided to make a decision to actively take advantage of the state system. And I want to point out that this is true irrespective of how hard these people try, how hard they try to work, how much they suffer, or how much they hustle. And this is a frame that opening government misses that is incredibly important to the fact. I think that there are clearly narratives of hard work that can exist independent of the notion of laziness. And the question is why? I think it's good to try your best, exists irrespective of whether or not we abandon the stigma of laziness. And this does respond to OO as well. The reason is that I think that laziness is unique because when we think about it socially, it's often measured in terms of outcomes. That is to say that by and large, society views people like homeless individuals, and they are perceived as lazy, even if those individuals are on the street consistently hustling to be able to improve their lives. That group of people are still perceived as lazy, and the hard work that they put in is not acknowledged. We want to shift that to emphasize hard work. But I want to point out that the reason why hard work is different then is that, first of all, everyone perceives themselves as working hard. We're selfish, we believe that we're doing a lot of work, and so by virtue of that, I think that everyone has a preconceived a view of themselves as being hardworking. But second of all, I think that the difference is, because socially laziness is measured in outcome terms, effort is something that is a lot less observable. So it is hard to deny that someone's been putting in the effort. It is hard to deny that someone's on the street trying to improve their lives and that these things do not matter. So what that suggests is that a shift toward hard work is still tenable in our world, that you can still do things like try and go outside, that you can still do things like try and improve your life. But the difference is critically that this gets acknowledged in a way that socially it cannot in their worlds. So OO suggests, counter to empirics, that the notion of being a leech off of the state, for example, as making the decision not to contribute, that this wouldn't sway anyone, because there are counter narratives, right? People don't want to be mean, for example. But these narratives do not apply as they may to the OG case, because there's no proximity to these groups. That is to say that you do not perceive the harm of making them suffer, that you do not feel personally attached to them, that people aren't strictly rational and overrate their own work, and so the conception of being told that other groups of individuals are lazy resonates in a way that it doesn't when we talk about other narratives. So the point then is, why does this actually lead to welfare loss in a substantial set of circumstances? The first reason is, I think that it creates a huge amount of shame. That is to say that welfare recipients do not feel like they want to actually access welfare in a lot of instances, but they feel shameful for going to regions where they can access those things. When they're asked whether or not they're welfare, they don't want to talk about it, so they can't get identified as a group of individuals who can advocate for the expansion of welfare services. Then in a lot of instances, when people are approached and asked why are they on welfare, they try and justify it with loads and loads of reasons, try and make it seem like there's sort of logic behind it, rather than acknowledging the structural barriers that just society exists and explain these things. So I think the huge amount of shame that you burden these people with in the world of opposition means that even when welfare exists, there's a huge amount of stigma for being able to access it in the first place. So you cannot get the full set of benefits. But second of all, even if you can access it, you can't speak out about when it's not enough. That when you are being given charity from the state as it's often portrayed, you cannot say that this isn't enough to support you. You can't talk to people and say that even though I'm working hard, there isn't much that I can get out of this, that this isn't enough money to survive, that I'm trying to feed my family, and nobody listens to that because it's still framed as laziness. The third one, okay? People want to cut it. I've heard that people on the like sort of politically receipt side want to cut it because they feel like this is their hard-earned money that nobody else has has done sufficient things to deserve access to. So to the extent that we exist in an outcome-based world, I think that this goes right. Why do we become more receptive in our world? First of all, I think they just hear about needs for welfare a lot more. That people are more sympathetic to listening to messaging about hard work than they are when it comes overwhelmed by notions of laziness, because they resonate with the notion of hard work. They see themselves as hard workers as well. So this leads to targeting welfare services as well. And second, I think hard work becomes emphasized by the West wing a lot more. That to identify the particular people and all of the work that they're doing at home, and all of the ways in which they're contributing to society, beyond the strict outcome that people evaluate homeless people or people that are on welfare in terms, which means that you can actually identify them as hard workers, that there's a political resonance there as well. But thirdly, because even if welfare doesn't increase, and even if we cannot show that the way that welfare numerically increases in terms of access, we think that people's self-perception of being on welfare improves, even in a racist society. That is to say, you feel a lot less bad at yourself for accessing these services. You feel a lot less bad when you go to receive that check. You feel a lot less bad at acknowledging the fact that you were receiving welfare, and therefore you can talk about it, and you can continue to access it, and you don't feel bad. So a broader group of people want. I'll take over.
The stigma is unlikely one of the major factors in the otherization of the poor. The differences in non-restrictive nature of the stigma immediately allows privileged people to be stigmatized for basically their attention.
But I don't understand. I think this is a unique way in which it is stigmatized. And further, the fact that this is outcome-based, and also the assertion that it is not going to be used against the poor is just an assertion. There are reasons in the case why it is levied against them. So why is this going to weigh as an incredibly important thing in ground? First of all, this is just the most acute set of people. I'm sorry, but the POI tells you literally why this case is so important. Like, oh no, the privileged people that are very, very sad that they're working 2 more hours a day. Like, fine, but also there are people that actually cannot access sufficient money to be able to support their family in our world. This is a CG case. This is so much important. There are millions of people that rely on these services that fundamentally feel shame every time they access it. They feel worse about themselves even when they deposit those checks. And that is a really, really huge part. But second of all, it applies to a very clear set of people. You get caught up in the clash of random sets of people about gym membership, etc., etc. Here is a certain set of people that actually know structurally are demonized by this narrative in a way where it is uncertain whether or not this narrative applies to other groups of people to the same extent. But first of all, I just think this is a unique set of people in the round that hasn't been discussed thus far, that it is deeply important to acknowledge their suffering, and to the extent that even if we can prove at our worst case, there's just marginally more people who can access welfare, the difference to the quality of life that we can provide them for is so, so great. We should prove this.
We are all stuck in pointless dopamine loops that make us miserable, and consumerism wants this. 2 extensions from closing opposition. First, the way the rest OG wants to have is not going to be actually resting rest, but to make you more tired, and is of a low quality. And the second extension engages with CG in terms of the working class. I think opening government poses a great challenge to opening opposition, when in the DPM they say, why doesn't a weaker version of this narrative work? Why do you need immense shame to actually have some sort of rest? Because they say people have an intrinsic need to be productive and to do something. But we will first prove why there are countervailing pressures that force you not to be productive in the status quo. Firstly, trivially, we are biologically primed to prioritize short-term gratification over long-term gratification. This is because the amygdala is much more central to our evolution, in which we need to survive right now. If we eat sugar, it feels really good because it has a lot of calories. Newsflash, sugar is everywhere right now, which means we are more susceptible to it and to fall prey to our base instincts. But secondly, and more perniciously, consumerism amplifies this. Firstly, because now we have neurobiologists working at companies to make you stuck in dopamine loops. How does this look like? This looks like social media algorithms, specifically rationing out the content that you find entertaining every 10 minutes. So it's basically like a slot machine, so that you scroll for like 6 hours a day and don't do nothing. Secondly, intrusive advertising. Because PM says people know what makes them happy. Bullshit. People don't know what makes them happy. It is because capitalism forces you to want something because you have ads all over you and they cater to your prime instincts. You have pornography ads popping up on the internet. You have McDonald's posters all over you. You have a variety of different entertainment genres. You have AI algorithms that know your preferences, that mind your behavior, metadata, know how to make you addicted. This means this is difficult to resist even if you want to be productive. Why is this important? Because this engages with the fear mechanisms on the hedonic treadmill. We agree with OG that you want to have a good level of rest and happiness. But the problem is that the leisure that's being taken in the status quo is one of constant stimulation. You never truly rest, you never truly meditate, you're constantly given like bursts of dopamine. This means you never are at rest, you never are mindful, which means on their metric, you're actually like more irritated and stuff like that. And crucially, this fills in a huge burden in opening opposition. Because all of us identify there are good ways to be productive, like with exercise and stuff like that. But we tell you why, with this narrative, you won't go for those good ways of exercising, and why this is crucially needed. So why is training needed and why it works? Firstly, note that training is social. Someone else needs to train you for you to be trained. I'll take it later. So, this is good because then your friend says, don't be lazy, go hiking with us. Which means you're less likely to be alienated in society. It means you actually talk to a person, and when you say to them, oh, I spent 5 hours playing Baldur's Gate, he tells you to be a generous. Secondly, there's a good conservative right-wing narrative right now against degeneracy. And this is a positive thing, by which people tell you, don't be a cooler, don't push for pornography all the time, this is bad for your mental health, and stuff like that, which pushes you away from these things that trap you in dopamine loops and stuff like that. Thirdly, the more you do something that's difficult, because if you actually go out and you don't be a lazy fuck, the easier it is to do it next time. When you do 5 push-ups on day 1, it feels impossible, but on day 30 you can do 10, which increases your confidence and self-esteem. So on the OG metric, you feel more rested. So you feel more confident that you actually can work out and achieve what you want, which means that when you go to work, you feel better and you feel healthier. Why is this important question to talk about? Because we prove that the leisure that's going to be happening anyway is not going to be a higher quality leisure. Because when people motivate you to get out of bed and do something useful and to do and have hobbies that are social and that improve your health, you're going to feel better. Before getting your second extension, OG.
So the stigma against laziness should be to work hard so you can eat more food, buy nicer food, receive social praise. Why is that better than just doing things because they make you intrinsically happy? But when your friend says,
because we have terrible brains. Like, if I could because I do human brains, I would, because human brains like only think about the short-term gratification. If you need your brother something to tell you you're stupid, don't do things to make you happy in the short term. Okay, second extension of the working class. I just want to note that this argument from Gall is incredibly high burden because all sorts of things like affect the type of the government have cyclical like changes in politics. Sometimes there's a political crisis which motivates people to vote left and stuff like this. So the margin is quite small. But actually we're going to see that this narrative is a lot more accessible to the working class. First, on the counterfactual. The working class will be stigmatized in the counterfactual anyway, because the only metric of their house is success. How much money you have, irrespective of how much you work. Why is this the case? Firstly, because people who have more money have more political capital anyway, and they want to have their political interests and do welfare and stuff like that. Secondly, because we're intrinsically hierarchical animals, and we compare each other with one to each other. And thirdly, success is glamorized anyway. Like you want to buy fancy boats, you want to have hot women and stuff like that. But no, this is a comparative. Instead of blaming the poor for being lazy, you blame them on being intrinsically not good enough, not smart enough, and stuff like that. So you and your poor feel even less like capable of mobilizing because the narrative tells you that you are not worthy. But numeracy is actually more accessible for the working class. Why? Because all we now say is that you have to work hard to be like, you have to grind, not that you have to be successful. Why is that not in a good way? Firstly, know that Gen Z is more progressive because we have access to social media. And we can actually see that rich people are useless fucks when they post stupid shit. This means that we can feel like collective elation in roasting people who are powerful willing to do anything. But secondly, now you can have leftist sentiment glorifying hard work amongst each other. Unionization itself is an act that is active. You have to go and protest. It's not something that's passive. So we can pride amongst yourselves, and even if you don't achieve success, you feel like you did something. But finally, practically, this can help the working class do things. And I'm going to weigh against CG. Even if CG wins politically, there's a much higher margin for change in your life individually than collectively. Because even if you're poor, it's quite cynical for CG to say you can't do nothing. You can't do things. Why would you do things very factual? Firstly, because success is difficult. It's easy to give up because it takes 5 years to do something and you feel it's impossible. Especially if you're marginalized. If you're poor, you think that success is something for rich people, not for me. But when there is more demand to be productive, the productivity industry pops up. Things like educational resources online, like Brian said here online lectures how to be better at math. Even telling you how to study more efficiently, so you have like resources for you that are good to study. But also accountability group, like a WhatsApp group with your friends that tell you, have you been working out today? If you haven't been working out, you're a degenerate, you should hustle, and you find resources on the internet that will actually improve your life. So actually, you might not become a middle class, but you might get a marginally better job and feel more confident. On the metric of gut bench, this is a clear CEO slam dunk.
Something pretty annoying right now and just say that most teams have not been debating the best form of the debate. Because the stigma against laziness is not simply the flip side of the glamorization and the celebration of hard work. The reason for this is twofold. The first thing is, it is completely possible for you to celebrate hard work while acknowledging that it's okay for you to be lazy. So for example, I say, when you work hard, you can make massive leaps and bounds in your education and your happiness, but if you choose to be lazy, if you don't really care very much about working hard, and if there's a line that is equal data, that's fine too. Like, this is a perfectly coherent narrative. The reason why this is really important is because the CO case refuses to defend actually stigmatizing laziness. They support celebrating hard work. They support working hard to pursue your own goals. But many of these are more tied to things such as being able to be decisive about your life, having good choices, having strong social circles, things that aren't really tied to this narrative. This debate should not happen about what the stigmatization against laziness could look like hypothetically, but what it does look like in the real world. And it's therefore extremely important to try and ask ourselves, how are we exposed to this stigma? What Isaac does is he latches onto one of the most fundamental and powerful ways in which this narrative is spread. That is, that if you are lazy, you're going to get nowhere in your life. That if you're lazy, you're going to end like that homeless person who's begging for money, for example, and if you want to do anything at all, you need to do better because otherwise you're a worthless sack of shit. Like, that is the kind of thing that we're specifically debating about. And that's why it's so very important that we fight our case, because that's a unique impact in the debate. Frankly, I'm going to try and group the two first before explaining why you need OG. So let me just do the safe, secure thing in half rounds. First then, let's speak with the all-bench teams together, because CO runs an admittedly selfishly better version of the argument from OO, but they're similar enough to us still simultaneously. Okay, so what does all-bench say? They say that the counterfactual people become stuck in ruts and they're very unhappy. The stigmatization against the happy laziness pushes you to change your life for the better, and this happens in a bunch of ways. CO as a nice clarification that this is compounding, and your life changes in the long term as a result of this policy. My first and biggest response is people don't default to periods of rest on either side of the house and inertia, because people don't just like lie around doing nothing, right? I get that O's offended different picture of the quote, but on either side you have to earn fucking money and you don't have a choice, which means that you go to work, you come home, you sleep. The second thing is that the own best case scenario applies to children, perhaps, who do actually have this choice. But children are not very clever people because you don't have a very strong sense of self-identity. Therefore, narratives of social stigma, etc., also apply to you much less because you care less about being perceived as really socially strong. So for those reasons, I do have that significant change here. But the final and best response is this. I don't think that their arguments about being on your phone all day, the dopamine addiction, is actually tied to being lazy. When do you guys stick around on your phone for 4 straight hours? Usually on the weekend, often an incredibly exhausting work week. Usually it's after you come home absolutely burned out. And that's because you acknowledge that the situation you're experiencing right now is fucking miserable. This kind of sucks that you actually enjoy Candy Crush, but you just don't have the fucking energy to do anything differently. The reason this matters then is because we don't then need the stigmatization against laziness to compel any change in behavior, because either way you're happy with the status quo as it stands. What you need to do is to be able to take the space to not put yourself in a position of being so burned out that you're trapped in this loop of dopamine addiction. Because dopamine addiction happens when you're able to find better, happier, better source of happiness in your life. It's also why their mechanisms about your friends dragging you out to go on hikes doesn't apply. Because on either side of the house, when someone invites me to go on a hike, I'm like, fuck yeah, that sounds really fun, let's go. I know that's my personality, but just like go with it for now. And I think that the reason why this is important is there's a distinction between active and passive choices. You're identifying a passive problem and seeing that they solve actively. I don't think that actually happens. We solve this much, much better. Okay, I'll take a few away from closing.
Great, but as all already says, the motivation to be productive can also happen with leisure. So when you play Candy Crush, it's about leisure, use your leisure productively. You work to the extent of this, but you don't respond to this whole frame.
That's really smart. I think, though, that it's kind of inaccurate, right? Because when you imagine working really hard and avoiding the stigma of laziness, you don't think about someone aggressively resting. Like, when you imagine someone being lazy, you think of a CEO on the fucking Bahamas, lying between 2 palm trees, having a great time. Happiness generally is perceived as laziness when you're escaping the difficulty and painfulness of work. You're being lazy while the rest of us fucking work. That's what this narrative fucking looks like. Alright. Then talking about CG and about why a role that stigma is one way in which poor people are much better looked after. What does Isaac tell you? We're willing to seek out welfare much more on our side because you're not sure something you have a problem, and you don't crucially try to solve the problem just by working harder because you're told that laziness is a moral ill that you impose on yourself that goes away if you just try harder. Number 2, you're less ashamed of yourself for going on welfare. And that's really important because the counterfactual is you don't have to work to justify your existence. You deserve to exist. And the fact that your welfare is insufficient to grant you that quality of life is a failing of the state as opposed to a failure by yourself. You shouldn't be punished when you're unemployed. 3, politicians are less able to stir up crowds because the image of a welfare clinic with 14 children who keeps having kids because you'd rather have more welfare staffs than to have any, than to do out work is a mental image that is deeply seared into our conscious now, but doesn't exist on their side. I understand this is a narrative debate. I understand that it's difficult, it's easier to talk to say, and then I work harder, and then my mental health is better, than to try to make any right stupid arguments. But this is a really fundamental stigma that spreads across the entire society, and obviously accrues a significant impact as well. 3 reasons why this is enormous. The first thing is, at the very least, Isaac proves that on a micro level, people are more enthusiastic about seeking out welfare centers. That's critical because the period of time between you losing your job and you seeking out welfare is enormously important to determining whether we fall into cycles of cyclical unemployment where you burn through all of your savings or not. So if we feel that people are more enthusiastic about good, and this means we leave a little approach on their side. Number 2, because if a politician is a person to spread this narrative, this has enormous impacts because they accrue and magnify. Like one single big public speech to say, this is what people are currently doing, this is what results, changes people's lives and makes them much more emotive. And they treat other people in their life who are poor, who are working as worse, and all of these direct interactions happen every single day. But finally, I think a lot of this is about what socially acceptable to say. It's really fucking bad to say, X group people is just inherently less stupid, but because laziness is a quote-unquote choice, it's much easier than to shame the folks who don't take it, because you have that good black person, for example, the exception to the rule, and thus justify the poisonous stereotype everywhere else. CG can go through because they effectively don't have an extension. If they want to say that this is something that is going to help increase the welfare, two possible scenarios. Firstly, why is this unlikely? First, Isaac spends like 5 minutes explaining why rich people don't like poor people and don't like giving out their money, and then says, oh, but like this norm is going to change this, which is something that is like incredibly high burden and unlikely. If it is true that rich people don't like poor people, then this is all symmetric. Like rich people are still not going to want to be taxed, they're still not going to want, you know, their money going into someone else's pockets, irrespective of like norms and like whatever is happening in the society. It's just like selfishness and incentives and stuff like this. Secondly, poor people tend to be politically apathetic body, which means that you're often like not allocating a lot of funds like as a government to them and stuff like this, which means that like there is zero anything changing. And also like I think this is also like dealing with are you going to feel ashamed that you're taking a welfare or not feeling ashamed that you're taking wealth? I think that like poor people unfortunately are still stigmatized when they're sent out of the house. Secondly, if it is not true that like rich class hates poor people and all sorts of things, then this is also how narrative exists, right? Because then also working class is co-opting and interpreting parts of narrative. Look, I come from like I think we're the only people here who don't come from Ivy League schools. Like we come from working class family, and like the thing is that like this is not funny. And the thing is that like when you're working hard, like the only thing that like was like keeping my mother, you know, like being able to like work 3 jobs a day is that, and knowing that it's a dead-end job, like you can't progress, you can't be productive, like you can't improve. The only thing that, you know, like keeps you sane is that like knowing, okay, what I'm able to do is be productive. I'm happy that I did 8 hours of work today. I'm happy that I cleaned the house because like this is like what it gives me like access of dopamine, just a mere fact of me doing something and not being lazy and laying around all day and stuff like this. Secondly, I think that a lot of people are just like saying in this debate how this narrative is likely to look like without justifying why it is likely to look like this, right? Because like what quoting Bench says is that like this narrative is going to say that people who like don't have good lives are lazy. Why is it true that narrative is going to be interpreted and promoted this way? I believe that what happens what happens is that when there is a dominant norm or dominant narrative, it is proliferated within the society, which means that different people are interpreting it in different ways. Also, secondly, you have an incentive that people are going to opt into this narrative, right? Which means that like when proliferation of the norm and narrative happens, different people interpret it in different ways. Like for example, there have been like YouTube channels of people who are poor explaining how they're being like productive in their dead-end jobs and all these sorts of things. So like I think that this is why like this happens on our side of the house, that like you are able to like what does it mean to be not lazy? It means that like you're just doing something. Like for example, instead of watching another episode of next show, you take 30 minutes more and to work hard and stuff like this. So I think this is why it is likely that this narrative is going to be interpreted in an accessible way for the people. Feeling very open in government. I think the first observation with their case is that like they're just giving you examples. Like, oh, people might think that you are like lazy when you have someone when you are depressed. Or like people might think all those sorts of things. But why is this likely scenario, right? But they're not giving you any structural reasons for anything. Secondly, notice that they say on their side of the house that people still have an incentive to be productive, which is a problem. Which is that you still have an incentive to be productive. This is a problem for their side of the house because it mitigates a lot of their impacts, right? Like for example, when they say you cannot enjoy rest, on their side of the house you also cannot enjoy rest because you're going to think, oh, I have to be more productive and stuff like this. This kills a lot of their arguments, right? But secondly, why is in order to reach productivity, you need our narrative first. And this is how we are co-opting open government, because what Robbie tells you is that this literally just like works in your head and saying, okay, don't watch this next episode of TV. Don't watch this porn video. Don't, like how you say, eat this junk food, eat a salad and stuff like this. These are little incremental growth that you can apply every single day. Why is this something that's important? Because if their only motivator is productivity, productivity can be a long-term goal and it is very hard to reach. Like for example, finishing a college takes 5 years. Becoming a very good debater takes 10 years and stuff like this. Improving in your work takes like 10 years and stuff like this. Achieving on our side of the house where you have narrative about not being lazy, this is a narrative that you can access every single day. Every day I can do a little bit more work. Every day I can do a little bit more something, and then growth is incremental and it's going to lead to benefits and stuff like this. This is also especially important for vulnerable people that they are talking about, because to vulnerable people, like if you're like ESL or woman in debating, it's going to be that more harder for you to like improve and stuff like this. But when you are able to do these little changes every day, this is going to be good. Secondly, they're going to say, they say that you are going to be identifying as lazy and give up. No, if something is stigmatized, you're less likely to want to identify like this. Like laziness is still going to exist on our side, on their side of the house. It's just not going to be stigmatized, so people are more likely to be like, I'm lazy, whatever. Secondly, they say that like some people are born with less capacity to be productive. I think I already deal with this. But secondly, on our side of the house, like you're going to deal with this, like knowing, like for example, okay, I have ADHD. It's harder for me to study, but at least I'm studying, and this is good because it's better not to give up because you still live in capitalism, you still live around people who are like very successful and stuff like this, and it's better to not to try to give up. Then they're saying that like people are going to think that you're lazy, people will advertise and stuff like this. Why is this unlikely interpretation? Number one, this narrative does not exist in a vacuum. It coexists with other dominant societal narratives, such as raising mental health awareness. For example, like this means that people are like just like there is a proliferation of research about like mental health and stuff like this, and okay, some people have clinical depression, clinically means that like they can't work hard and all these sorts of things. But secondly, people just have general empathy, right? Like if you see a coworker who is very productive all the time, and then like you see them slacking, you're not going to assume, oh, they're shit, you're just going to assume like probably they have some diagnosis. Yeah.
People can logically weigh short-term and long-term preference because we're not monkeys. Why is it shameful stigma?
No,
people
they
feel bad and afraid.
They
better than one that makes them feel happiness, joy, and
Robbie gives you structural analysis that like why it is likely that you are prioritizing short-term pleasure over long-term, especially to the people like who have like a lot of obstacles in their life. Like if you're like someone who like who have a lot of obstacles, you are more likely to give up and stuff like this. Secondly, they're saying that like people have an incentive to work hard either way, but like this is something that we are able to access better than our side of the house. And they're saying you're going to indulge in free productivity. No, in most cases, because you still want to be successful, which means you want to maximize the outcome of your time. But secondly, even if you do this isn't necessarily bad. Because, for example, if I stretch out a simple task, maybe I do it better, maybe I do it more careful and stuff like this. Then they're saying that there's going to be stigma when you're going to ask for vacation and all these sorts of things. This applies symmetrically if they say there is productivity incentive on their side of the house. But secondly, you are going to be like on our side of the house, you are going to be more able to like enjoy hedonistic experience if you have like more money and all these kinds of things. I think we're way over-opening because they're vulnerable to government bench because the government bench says you still have an incentive to be productive, but our extension uniquely explains why we have capacity to access this.